No one at Salesforce thinks more deeply about what the agentic AI era means for developers, admins, and architects than my next guest, Christophe Coenraets, SVP of Technical Audience Relations. Now, TDX is Salesforce's developer conference. How has the role of developer changed with agentic AI?
Yeah, I think that's a question that's on everybody's mind because, if you think about it, as a developer, I used to write every single line of code in an application. That was my job. And, the way the role is changing is that now I'm not responsible for writing all that code anymore. We are moving into an era of, what people call intent-driven development. And what that means is that you describe what you want, you describe your intent, and then you have that awesome coding partner that does all the hard work, if you want, that writes all the code. And so as a developer, you become like, the manager of that coding agent. If you want to kind of review the code that's being generated, you kind of fine-tune the intent that you expressed, and you keep fine-tuning, and that agent is kind of, writing the code for you. So that's an amazing change, for developers, right here at TDX.
So how is Salesforce, it's a massive shift. So what is Salesforce doing to help developers with this new way of building apps?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, developers have a ton of choice right now because there is a lot of innovation in the industry and there are a lot of tools, right? There is, Cloud Code and people use, Codex or Cursor. There are plenty of different tools that developers can choose from. So at Salesforce, we want to meet developers where they are. So we want to embrace the tools that they may already be using. So one of the big things that we talked about just right now in the keynote is all these MCP tools. And what that means is that any developer tool that is MCP compliant can actually use these MCP tools to connect directly to Salesforce, to the Salesforce platform, and to the developer lifecycle. So again, it's about meeting developers where they are. But some developers will want an integrated, development environment. And for those developers, we have Agentforce Vibes, which is kind of a more of a native, development environment, but very open to all the coding models that developers may want to use. And then, of course, the benefit of that is that also all your code and your metadata stays within the Salesforce trust layer. So it's really about openness and choice.
Exciting stuff. So I'm sure developers want to know, okay, if I'm looking to solve a problem, how do I know if I want to build an app or an agent?
Yeah. That's funny that you ask that because I think that's one of the kind of the number one question that I get asked by developers out there. They get a set of requirements and they are like, okay, should I build that as an app or should I build that as an agent? And what we have seen over the last 2 years is that conversational interfaces, so really what agents use, they have become really, really popular. But sometimes you may wonder, have we lost all the richness that we all got used to? When you use an application, you have all these rich components that make it really easy to visualize the data and to interact with the data, right? So another thing that we spoke about in the keynote today is that concept of Agentforce experience layer. And what that does, it allows you to create rich components that you can then inject in the flow of conversation in these conversational interfaces. So one way to think about it is that it brings the best of applications in the flow of conversation so that you don't deal with, a wall of text all the time. And the last thing that I would add is that now, within the same conversational interface, you can actually work across different systems without context switching all the time. You don't have to go to different destinations, to different applications. You can do all that within the same conversation.
That's so exciting. I'm sure developers are going to love that. Now, developers have been building apps for many years. What's different about building agents?
Yeah. Well, when you build an agent, first of all, compared to an app, right? If I build an app, like we just said, I'm responsible for every single piece of logic. When you build an agent, the agent is going to reason, it's going to orchestrate. So there is some of the logic that as a developer, I don't have to write anymore because the agent is going to take care of it. It's going to reason for me. So that is one of the big differences is that you have to trust that agent, if you want, to reason on your behalf. But the second piece that is related to that is to make sure that the agent is going to behave the right way. So it's not so much about building. The difference is really about testing. In a traditional application, you do unit tests and you can really pretty much make sure that your application is going to behave the way you intend. When you have an agent that reasons and takes decisions on the fly, the way you test that is very different, right? So we have tools like the testing center that you can use to test your agent with a number of prompts, so to make sure that in general your agents behave the way you intended. But then at runtime, something may go wrong. And then we have tools like observability that allows you to kind of trace back what went wrong so that you're kind of shaping the behavior of an agent instead of running unit tests, if you want. So these are some big differences.
All right, we've got time for one last question. The Trailblazer community, it's always been a big differentiator for Salesforce. How is the community shaping the direction of the innovation when it comes to agents and AI?
Well, they are the most important part because at the end of the day, we build all these tools, but, the use cases, the ideas, the creativity really comes from the community, right? So, that's why we do things like the hackathon, for example, to kind of try to inspire these ideas. But we see the community coming up with incredible use cases. We saw Engine in the keynote with, some amazing agents. And so, what I would tell the community, sometimes they ask me, what should I do next? Get hands-on, like play with the technology and the ideas will keep coming.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Christophe. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.